go ahead and get started with our programming. I'm joined by Dr. Diane Durant today, and she's actually, and Frank, her cat, who looks like he may be joining us the whole time. Totally fine.
Yeah.
Anxious to hear his wisdom. Diane's actually one of our board members. So she serves on the Cedars Union board, and she's a professor at University of Texas at Dallas. And she's joined me today with not only a jurying experience, but also serving on the selection committees for art programs, so MFA programs and whatnot. And I am not for MFA programs, but I serve on the selection committee for a artist residency in Corsicana, Texas, Corsicana Artists and Writers Residency, which, small plug, that application is due on September 1st. And so we both have experience going through hundreds of applications, and you quickly find sort of pitfalls or places where you really wish, man, I wish people knew about this thing that I see all the time, that is always a mistake that's always made. So those are the kind of things we're going to go over today. And we're going to do it in a pretty relaxed fashion. So if you have any questions as we go, you will see two ways to communicate. There's a chat. Chat's sort of like for, hey, hello, how's it going? I will also drop links as they're necessary into the chat. But if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A at the bottom there. That'll help us keep track of what questions we've answered and what we haven't. Sometimes the chat things can get lost. And then, of course, if you have any questions specifically about the Cedars Union application, you can reach out and ask us questions as we go. That application is due on October 2nd. All right. Diane, do you have any intro words?
That's a good question. No, I don't, because I mean, everyone is different, and every application, though unique, definitely there are things that you just get asked for again and again. And I mean, you're in the same boat too. I mean, as artists who have submitted, applications, and then who have, as professionals, reviewed them, it's crazy. There are just things that you see again and again and again, and that, when you were, new to submitting to, various organizations or applications or galleries or, whatever, schools, that you did the same thing. So I don't know, Frank and I are excited. We're ready to do our best to share any wisdom that we've learned from our time as artists and professionals. But yeah, definitely ask questions so that we can tailor this to those of you who are here, and let's do it.
All right, let's tear in. All right, so first wanted to go over different kinds of applications you might see. Obviously, programs in general, like for instance, Cedars Union Cohort 3. Like I talked about, residencies, which you'd also consider as a program. Got schools and scholarships, exhibitions. What else do I have on my list?
Yeah, thinking about grants. You submit proposals to all kinds of things, and sometimes proposals can take different formats. I have found it helpful. I know in my folder of things, which is what it's called, that I have a short bio and I have a long bio. I have a short CV and a long CV. I have a 150-word proposal blurb or artist statement. I have a 300-word artist statement. I have a 1-page artist statement, all for the same body of work. So, every time I submit a proposal or, anything, I always copy and paste that text, whatever it was I submitted, and I save it and I date it. And sometimes I go, it feels like it's constantly changing, but or just maybe I come up with one more, a better word, or I don't know, a better way of saying it. But so it does, I guess it's moldable in a way, but I do know having on the ready, because it's like the same things are asked for, but not always in the same format, or not always the same number of words. Because, a proposal is a proposal. Your artist statement is your artist statement. So there's my first free tip right there.
Yeah. I have a folder that just says applications, that like anytime it's an application, I save it in there. And I don't apply to things like I used to, but there also don't get caught up in like use those as tools, but also remember, like Diane said, everything needs to be moldable. So you don't want to just apply with the same content for different purposes.
Yeah. I think, one time I submitted for something, and the fourth time I submitted, I got it. And every single time when I wrote, like, I thought my first proposal, application for this exhibition was really solid. I didn't get it. I went back and looked at it again, reworked it. I didn't get it. Went back and looked at it again, reworked it. So, and then the fourth time I got it, when I went back and compared them all, I was like, man, that did just get better and better and better every single time. And that was me growing personally, right? As an artist, learning how to talk about my work. But I just kind of knew what I wanted better. I knew how to say it better. So, even just don't apply the same thing with the same stuff. There's a reason why you didn't get in, but always trying to improve upon it. Allow yourself to kind of be critical in that way.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the purpose of what the program is you're applying for. So I will say, looking at residency applications, if you say you need time and space, like, no shit, you need time and space when you're applying for residency, right? So it's not like you shouldn't say that. Just like, don't let it be the linchpin of why you need to be there, because you won't stand out.
You're not the only person that needs that.
Right.
That's the thing too, is that sometimes things like that, letters of intent and statements, they're so boring. And not that it needs to be super spiced up, because it needs to be professional, but it's okay to have your voice. And I would much rather read something that's clever and I learn a lot about the person, but still well done and professional, not like, I don't know, poorly executed. I mean, like, any idea can be poorly executed, and then that's a terrible idea. But I like getting to know the person, rather than it just being this formula, that the same thing, everyone says the same thing. So partly it's so that your application stands out, but it's, show some of who you are, and not be afraid to have your voice, discernible in your letter of intent or your artist statement.
Yeah, so I think that's a good segue, I think, into like the major components of applications. So we kind of got started talking about like artist statements, for instance, and some applications aren't going to ask strictly for an artist statement. Sometimes it has to be wrapped into your statement of intent. Sometimes it's wrapped into your bio. Again, moldable. If it asks for specifically an artist statement, that gives you more room to work on that specifically. But one of the mistakes that I've seen a lot with artist statements is one, them being too long. And too long is kind of relative, right? Like, if something asks for a 500 word max, doesn't mean you have to get to 500 words. Really, like, a short and effective statement when you're reading hundreds is fantastic. It's so refreshing. So
if it actually says something.
Like, make sure you need to hit your necessary components, right? Like, eliminate anything that feels redundant or fluffy or unnecessary, because you want it to be as robust and effective as possible. without kind of slowing your reader down too much.
Like you said fluffy. Oh man. And the cliches, avoid art speak. Really, I mean, you can use art language, right? Because maybe that's, you know how to talk about your work. But man, art speak and jargon and anything that's real, like extraneous, or it's fluffy, or it's redundant, of course, then your message gets lost. So I'd much rather it be 250 words, pack a punch, really speak to the work, really tell me something about it, rather than 500 words where half of it is art speak to show maybe how learned you are, or that you know how to use that word. And
And some of you maybe are applying like right after writing a thesis, and so it
I
can
don't
be
want to
really
read your
hard.
thesis.
Yeah, because you're just like, you expanded everything to 30 pages and now you've got to get it down to like 250 words.
Yeah.
And it almost feels wrong, like letting so much of that go. But you really gotta.
I mean, that's just as hard, honestly. That's just as hard. When I assign my students a 5-page paper, I tell them I want a 5-page paper. I don't want an 8-page paper, because that's the assignment, is getting it, shrinking it down. So just like you had to expand, yeah, it can be just as hard to say a lot in 200 words, but you can. You sure can. Trust me.
And then you also mentioned like it speaking to the work. I think sometimes there are things that artists feel like they should say because it's popular,
Yeah.
and they'll mention something about their background, or something that they think is interesting in like contemporary culture. But maybe like if you're the juror and you're seeing someone make this statement and then you're looking at the images and they just don't line up, then that's not going to be really helpful to you. So like
Yeah.
make sure that your statement actually is supported by the images that you submit.
That's true, because maybe the larger body of work makes sense, or kind of addresses some of the theme maybe you brought up. But if those 5 examples, or if you do speak specifically about something, which I do in my current artist statement, I have 2 quotes from text pieces that are in the images in the work. And if I'm not submitting those images, then I change out what the text pieces are that I'm quoting in my artist statement. So, because that would, on the one hand, you think, oh, but it's telling, what other work is out there. But I'm really trying to keep this a nice, tidy package. So I have, realized that it just reads super funky if you read these other quotes talking about this work and then I show you images and it's not those. So, which that might be a really narrow example. Sorry, our mailman is here. That might be a real narrow example, but in a broader term, yeah, we should be able to read the statement, and then if we see the images separately, know that's the work that was being talked about.
Yeah, which is also just like a challenge as an artist in general, right? You want you want what you think your artwork is doing to line up with what it's actually doing.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you feel stuck, like there are like a couple tips I have. When I was when I used to teach printmaking at UNT and at Clemson University, and I always have my students write a statement for every piece, just as good practice.
Yeah.
And one practice is always good. Like always just like sit down and write about your piece that you've just made to sort of reflect is a great practice. But you can also have a friend interview you. If you have somebody ask you questions about your work, that might help point out things that they're seeing. Or you can kind of just like do a blind read with a friend, like, hey, what are you seeing in this work? Start with objective, like literally, what do you see? And then they'll start to kind of analyze as they go. So, if you're totally stuck, just start like looking, right? Just look at the piece, write down what's there,
Yeah.
and see what gets unpacked. And you have a lot more to work off of if you go about things that way, I think, than if you jump to like conclusions that aren't based on the visual evidence that you're providing.
Yeah. And that's a good point. You say, it's like, I know what you want your work to be about, but that really might not be the message that's coming across. You can often, if you don't have someone else that you can go through this exercise with, because I make my students do that, they essentially interview each other. And then based on that interview, they write up a short critical essay about their partner's work. And then they read what their partner wrote, which it kind of takes from how they answered the questions, but also the evaluation, kind of the critique that their partner had of their work. If you don't have someone that you can do that with, which oftentimes after we graduate, that's not a possibility, you can kind of address your own work as if it's not your work. So you just go to it and look at the formal qualities and think about what the colors represent, or think about, whatever it is that you're, medium you're working with or what you're addressing, but just kind of pretend like it's not yours. And then you're not weighing it down with all of this meaning that you want to give it. And really try and create that distance and see if it works.
Okay, we can get back to artist statements if anyone has any other questions, but
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about images themselves too, Diane, because I think it's almost been a crux that we've got like these really readily available cameras that you can just snap and get like a great quality image.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be editing.
Right. Oh yeah.
So sometimes I'll see applications and then I see the work in person and I'm like, man, you really should have worked harder on these images because the work is much better than what you submitted.
Yeah.
Are there a couple things that you've seen in terms of students submit, especially over the virtual learning phase?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the lighting is horrible. The angle. So one thing great about being a photographer is that this often isn't a problem. But if I was photographing something that was three-dimensional or even any kind of object, it's important to just be mindful that the camera, the film plane or the plane of your camera is parallel with the object plane, because that tilt, those angles, it might seem like a lot, or it might seem like, well, I can't get up above my work and shoot it, but I guarantee you can. You can get a chair or a ladder and you can 100% get up above a work and shoot down on it. And really use, if you are using your phone, use that grid and try and get it to line up, because that does make a big difference. You can always pin something on the wall and shoot forward, but the angles and then all the extra stuff. So if you photograph your work on a table and I don't want to see the table, right? Like you need to, if it's flat, crop in the edges. And if it's a three-dimensional sculptural piece, it needs to be shot as much as as is humanly possible with a neutral background, neutral base. And that's not to overcomplicate it, but this is your work and you do want it to be represented as best as possible. So the third thing I would suggest is lighting, and more often than not, just the lights in your bedroom or the lights, from the fan and the lamp aren't going to be enough. And they're going to be a nasty orange color if you don't color correct the white balance. So, but that's things too that you can always ask people. I know at UTD, we often have photo professors that are doing commercial stuff or like working on shooting your work. And I know that we've done that at the CU. We've done like how to document, photograph your work. So kind of knowing that that is the first thing that jurors or committees are going to see of your work, really you need to represent it well.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't have like, I document a lot of things on my iPhone because I'm not really great at photography. And what I find is you can get pretty far. Like I have a lot of white space on my work. Like I said, or maybe I didn't say, I'm a printmaker, so there's a lot of just white paper that is surrounding the imagery, which can be really tough to get evenly lit. But I find if I shoot my work, like put it on the ground when the sun is at a good angle, if one side is lit up too much, you can even take another white sheet of paper and prop it up, on the other side, that it bounces the light back down on the darker side. There's lots of little things that also in your apps, like you can now do lens correction a lot of the time with an app. And so what I mean is, like, if it's little, like, you didn't perfectly line up things, you can adjust your lens correction. Definitely crop down, like Diane said. And I would say don't, like, I think there's a new trend with like social media and stuff of the artist holding up the piece, and having
don't do
like
that.
themselves be a part of the photo. But that really, I wouldn't recommend that at all, unless there's some reason that, like, or really you should, even to show scale, like
You're gonna put the measurements. You'll put the measurements on there. We'll know how big it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, some people do installation shots and they're beautiful. It gives a way to like show the depth of the work. And sometimes you can't really see the craft of like a stretch painting and you see it better if it's hung on a wall and photographed. That's not necessarily what I mean.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah. What kind of, we have a question in the chat. What kind of lens do you recommend for small work and details?
I guess it would depend how small. Really any macro lens is fine. I mean, it just depends how close you can get to it. How close you can get to the work. I don't know how small it is, but if you do have a camera that you can change the lenses on, I mean, you could even use just a 50 millimeter, but it depends. But again, it depends if it's a full frame sensor or a crop sensor. So I don't know if I can give you an actual number, but if you wanted to invest in something, a macro lens, whatever size would be considered macro for your machine, is a good one. Honestly, if you're shooting on a DSLR, and so you can shoot in RAW, always do that, which would be the difference, from what you can do on your phone. But if you shoot in RAW, you're going to have enough information where you can crop in a little bit, you can adjust the white balance. That's much easier to do without damaging the file. But then you would have to resave it later as a JPEG, as most applications, if they're digital, only will only accept JPEGs, or maybe not bigger than 5 megabyte file. That's another thing. Oh, are we gonna get to that? Like naming conventions and things. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a
follow
good
the rules. Yeah.
Yeah, real quick, I want to answer a question. It's not on images, but someone was asking if applying for a fellowship and grant you were previously rejected from, is it wrong to use the same artist statement, or should it be revised? I would revise it.
That's kind of what I was saying. It took me 4 times to get it. I mean, if the juror changes every year, or the selection committee changes every year, and that's part of what they're advertising, And so it's like, if you didn't get last year, apply this year because it's a whole new selection committee. Then maybe it's not as critical, but if it didn't land that first time, it's definitely worth another read, just really a really critical read, and decide, you know, if you can improve it. But it might not be a necessity. Of course, if it's the same folks reviewing applications, everything needs to be different.
Yeah.
I would
I
show
mean,
you
there's
images.
different people applying, so you never know.
Yeah, but if
But
they've already seen your work, I would give them more to see, because if they remember your work, then they've now seen twice as much as any other applicant because they maybe remember your work from last year. But I would show new images. You can still say the same thing in your artist statement, but I would definitely revisit it. Maybe take a
yeah,
different approach or add something to it or something like that.
and if it's a year later, also, like, you don't, if it's the same selection committee, you might be like, well, their work hasn't changed in a year.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so
So even if you're still working on that same project or body of work, you definitely want to show what else you've been, how else you've, you know what I'm saying, what else you've done. You get me.
going back to images for a second, I just want to also say, like I said, that there's a lot you can do with low tech stuff, even if you don't have an Adobe Photoshop account or whatever.
Yeah.
Just like go on YouTube and search like tips for editing your artwork with a phone, or
Yeah,
how to
like
shoot your artwork with natural light.
I was gonna say, yeah, I was gonna ask what apps you use. If you, whether you're shooting or doing any kind of, do you edit on your phone too? If you were like photographed your work, would you, what
Yeah,
apps?
I mean, I'm spoiled because, like, working at the Cedars Union, I've got access to all, like, a full Adobe suite.
Yeah,
But I find, and maybe this is dated, there's probably better ones now, but I like Afterlight a lot.
that is old, but it's
I
good.
know. And then, like, but since getting a Lightroom account, I just use Lightroom. But
Yeah, which, yeah, if folks are students and their institutions have subscriptions, that would transfer over also to your mobile devices. If like at school, I have access to Creative Cloud. Is that what it is now? And I can log in on my phone with that.
mhm.
Which it made me sad when I guess they announced they're going to axe Photoshop Fix, because I really loved it. But I like Snapseed a lot, especially for messing with the perspective if I get that wrong. And then I use Visco. So laugh all of you out there if you want. But I think Visco is getting better and better. I do like that I can adjust the temperature and the tint if I want to adjust the white balance. On Instagram, you can only adjust the warmth. So, because that's a huge thing. Like the whites need to look white, the gray needs to look gray, the black needs to look black in your work. And not all is going to be white balance. But there's a surprising number of apps now and you don't have to even shoot. And I mean, you can still shoot in the native camera app and get really good quality images. It's kind of insane.
Yeah.
So don't be discouraged if you think I only have my phone. It just takes a little bit of finessing and a little bit more work in post to do that. Yeah.
And then make sure that you've got the correct file size, and like DPI and all that. So a lot of the time an application will state, like, what the limitations are and whatnot. Look that up before. You don't want to be like last minute, you're applying and you feel like you've got everything ready to go, and then you find out that your images are all the wrong size. It's just better to know beforehand, if you can see.
That does suck.
Yeah.
I mean, because lots of times they'll either say it needs to be, less than 2 megs. I mean, it really depends on how many images, how many files they're anticipating receiving and what the platform is that they are, having you do the application through. But it's not uncommon to have, like, they need to be smaller than 1 megabyte. And you're like, you're not able to see my work. Or they tell you it needs to be 72, DPI, or it needs to be 1200 pixels on the longest side, or, whatever it is. And some of that you can just do a quick adjustment in Photoshop or other similar platforms. But that is important. If they give you a size that it should not exceed, there's definitely a reason for that, either storage on their end or how they're going to be viewing the work. So yeah, read through the whole application, or as much as it will allow. Okay, if it's multiple pages, sometimes you can't do that, but read through as much of the application as you can, have all of your materials ready to go, then go fill out the application.
And if they ask, like, if they ask for you to save your images a certain way, it's for their own organizational purposes. Like if it needs to be like last name, title, whatever, follow that, because you don't want to like annoy people by making it seem like you overlooked something
or didn't care enough.
Like, it's a small thing, but it makes a difference.
No, unfortunately it says a lot. It says, I didn't read the application, or I already had these saved, so I don't care what the size is supposed to be, or I like mine as TIFFs, not JPEGs. Like, we have no idea why they're asking for certain, files named a certain way, saved a certain way, certain sizes, because there are myriad reasons to why that's the case. But if they state that that is the case and you disregard it, it's very easy to disregard your application. Because if you don't care enough to do that at this stage, then perhaps they're not going to be as excited to work with you moving forward.
Yeah.
Kind of speaks volumes.
So I have a question about installation and time-based work. Is it bad practice to make simple collages showing how a work transformed, or is it better to have a single bigger image? Sometimes platforms allow you to do like an image of like the whole piece, and then not like thumbnails, like
details. You can include details.
Yeah. If you find it really crucial, one way to sometimes get around this is you can actually make a PDF of one piece, and have like, the larger piece in the details. I would really think about how necessary that is. So it doesn't feel like you're like skirting the like 5 images only. But if it really is like it's one piece and you feel like one shot doesn't do it justice and you only are able to submit 5 files, that's one way to get around it. Another way is to somehow, if you have the ability, mention that there's additional images on your website, or something like that. Do you have anything?
Yeah, those are good suggestions. Yeah, that is tough, because then you wonder, well, if I'm submitting this work to a show or as a part of a proposal or an application, and they're not allowing for me to show details, is this the best place for me to try and submit this particular work? Because maybe they're not thinking about installation, or maybe they're not going to be able to accommodate you, or maybe it's not a program that appreciates it. So definitely, before that, think about where you're submitting your work, because it's true, like it can be so good, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the best fit everywhere. So do think about that. And honestly, not every application is perfect. So it's possible that the folks who created the application just didn't think about making that an option to have details.
Yeah.
So you could always contact them in advance of the application being due and ask how they would like for you to submit details. But I admittedly years ago definitely made a PDF that showed a piece that was larger and then showed details, and I saved it as one image. I don't think I would suggest that unless they tell you to do that. Ideally, I first would contact them and say, how can I submit multiple angles of this? Is that possible? And then you're kind of on their minds, and you're creating a dialogue, and it's like, oh, look, they're trying to follow the rules and they care about our application, which is not a
Yeah.
bad thing.
Yeah. The
And then
same thing.
time-based work, I would make sure that to whom you are submitting, to whomever that may be, is accepting time-based work. Because as a photographer, stills photographer, we have a lot of folks who want to submit video, but we don't do video, and you can't take video, and we don't have a platform that can even receive a submission of video. And so that can be kind of tricky, because some of the bigger applications, you know, for grants and things like that, or even for schools, will have a video link, or they'll want you to host it on your site and link to it. So I guess it would depend, you know, what is being applied for, the best way to maybe handle video. But again, you can always err on the side of contacting them in advance and asking how they would prefer you submit video. If it's hosted on your website, you know, on YouTube or whatever, you could just include that link. But a lot of applications have that as an option to either upload or link to something.
Yeah, I've seen people also, like, will say, I always feel bad for video artists because it can be like, you know, you want to be in like a patient frame of mind to be able to like really absorb a good video piece. And that can be hard to do when you're going through a lot of applications. So if you have like, if your video piece is 20 minutes long, accept that they're probably not going to be able to watch it. Give your best, you know, portion of the video, and then include a link to like your Vimeo or wherever you have the video in full. That way you ensure that, like, if they only have time to commit 7 minutes to your video piece, they're seeing the 7 minutes you want them to see.
Yeah.
And then if you've piqued their interest, then they can go back and watch the full 20 minutes if necessary. So yeah, just keep in mind the like fatigue of going through applications for your juror.
Yeah, that is such an important point, is even just for a second to put yourself in the committee shoes, the juror's shoes, you know, because they're going to be looking at so much work. So whatever you can do to be kind of like selection committee friendly, is in your best interest, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to, I've got a few questions on here, but one person asked about letters of intent. I want to make sure we cover that because that's a really good one.
Yeah.
Any tips we have on writing one, and recommendations on websites, books, and articles about writing. Yeah, I can offer that as well. I'll do that in the chat. While you want to talk a little bit about letters of intent, Diane.
So, you know, there's your statement, your letter of intent, letter of purpose. There's a cover letter. So those are different. Okay. Your cover letter is definitely different from a letter of intent. So if in the throes of writing an application, you just need to Google that really quick, do that, because they're different. They have different formal properties, and they actually take a different tone of voice. So be mindful of what you're being asked to do. If you're asked to write a letter of intent or statement of intent, don't put a cover letter, because it's a different format. Because a letter of intent, in a way, statement of intent, kind of takes a more persuasive voice. So, you know, and that's its own style of writing, right? You want to make sure that you're, you know, saying what you intend to do and how those intentions will align with whatever the program's intentions are. I always like to, you know, because if it's a cover letter, then it's like, my name is Diane Durant, Diane Durant, applicant for XXY position that I found on blah, 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 College Art Association. And that's a whole different tone from, you know, your statement of intent, which is, for me, you know, I like to lead with little statements of some sort, like, I was raised a privileged white kid in West Texas, so things like that. But it's more personal. And then I go into, how that made me who I was, and why I am an artist, and why being this kind of artist would suit this kind of program. And I want to work with this professor, this artist. I want to use this facility. So you're letting him know, I know your program. I know exactly what it's all about. I know exactly how I'm going to fit in. Even if you're wrong, you might get there and work with someone else. You might get there and be somebody, and do other things. But at this point in your life, you identify your intentions would be to work on, this type of work with this professor, whatever the program is. Or you want to be at the CU because you want to take advantage of the wood shop and learn, how to use a lot of these tools that you didn't have access to in undergrad. And you want to work on this project and making your own frames and doing this body of work. And that's why you would be a good fit. And then I always like to end those kinds of things with, not only why they should pick me, but why I want to pick them, but why they should pick me. So I like to include, how I would contribute to the environment, the community. And I also do that when I write letters of recommendation for, students or other folks, is I really like to include how the university, let's say, would benefit from their being there. So think about that. Statements of intent, cover letters shouldn't be longer than a page, unless they've asked you to combine your cover letter and statement of intent, which is yikes. But I think your statements of purpose and intent can be 2 pages, but no more than that. And it's very much preferred if it's only a page.
Yeah, it also depends on the setting. So like, I know in applying to MFA programs, like my artist statement, and I found most applications wanted an artist statement and a statement of intent, and they were all about like a page. I like them for them to fit on a page with like 1.5 spacing, or at least 1.15 spacing.
Yeah.
But
and don't use funny fonts.
Yeah,
Times New Roman,
no Comic
maybe
Sans.
Arial. Yeah, no funny fonts.
Yeah, I know you might think you're being artistic, but it can just be hard to read. But just to circle back, the aspect of doing some research on the organization you're applying for. So, you want to be careful that, like, if you're applying for a residency where you're pretty much going to be the only one there the whole time, like, you might think twice about talking about wanting to be ingrained into a community, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
But like at the Cedars Union, if you should definitely take a tour with us if you haven't seen the space, and you're obviously local because you've got to be to apply. But come through the space. The staff will tell you all about this, the program and whatever, and then take notes and understand that, like, if we use the word community excessively, because it's a huge part of what we do is try to create a creative community for people. So that would be a great thing to think about. Like, if you're applying, if what you really want is like a totally private space and time on your own, we might not be the best fit for you in general.
Yeah, and that's good to know in advance. I mean, you don't want to fill out this application about how you just need to get away from it all, and then it's read and they're like, they don't know what we are about, or if I had someone apply at UTD and they wanted to get their, MFA in photography or their BFA in photography, I go, we don't have that as a program specifically. So maybe you are thinking about somewhere else, or maybe this isn't, we aren't what you think we are, so this isn't going to be a good match. So yeah, definitely do the research and definitely go take a tour of the CU regardless.
Yeah, I like location. I have for Corsicana, sometimes we'll have people applying from other countries, and like there's this notion in some countries that like all of Texas is like a total desert. And people will be like, I really want to be immersed in the desert landscape. And we're like, oh, like we're not in the
Like,
desert.
this is the
So,
Black Prairie. I'm sorry. That's not
yeah,
where we are.
just do some research is the biggest thing. And then all of the other things we talked about with the artist statement apply here. Like, don't be fluffy. Like, don't extend it as long as you can. Just try to get your point across as effectively and as briefly as possible without sacrificing anything.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I also put some, can you reuse letters of recommendation? I think that your rec letter, like if you have somebody who's written it for you, they really should be writing the rec letter for the institution.
Like
And
specifically, yeah.
even if they're repackaging the same material, like you're gonna want them to at least state the name. You're gonna hope that they use some information about what you're applying to in the
Yeah, like I
recommendation
said,
letter.
when I do a cover letter, or if I write a letter for someone else, it was, I am writing on behalf of this person's name, applicant for this program at whatever, whatever, or the job number, or yeah, you want them to write specifically for the thing that you are applying in that moment. I mean, which sucks because it'd be great to be able to reuse letters. But if it looks like if it's a new year, if it's a new time, I mean, I would think that you've done things in the last year that your reference could allude to. And especially if it has to do with just growth, for a program like CU, that is huge. So I would think about just going back to them, man, let me tell you, we who write recommendation letters often definitely save those. And we just shape them as needed because, right, there's no time to start from scratch every time. So your recommendations, your references from last year, they probably have those on file. They probably have them on the ready. But when you ask them again to either submit it on your behalf or send it to you so that you can submit it, which sometimes isn't even an option. I would appreciate if I were the one being asked to write a letter to be given an update from you. If I haven't spoken to you in a year, to know kind of what else you've been doing so that I can update that letter. Because if the institution were to come to me about that reference, I don't want to be like fumbling around thinking, oh, I didn't even know they applied again. Oh, I didn't even know, oh, that was for last year. Because that's kind of my stamp of approval. And it should also be dated accordingly. So
Yeah.
I would update them.
If you're using Slider too, like we do at the Cedars Union, you can't submit in most colleges, like you aren't submitting the
You're not the one that
recommendation
does
letter.
it. Yeah.
It's the recommender.
Yes.
That
The reference. Yeah.
thank you. The
Yeah.
reference
I like recommender.
is submitting it directly to the institution. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah. It didn't used to be that way though. I remember asking for a reference letter when I was first applying for jobs out of grad school. And I went back and asked the man again for a different job that I was applying for. And he was like, you really should just save this. And I was like, how? It's not, that doesn't work that way anymore. Like, he didn't understand because he was old. And I was like,
in a sealed envelope.
Yeah, you can't do that anymore. Where you just sign across the seal. So yeah, it doesn't work that way anymore.
Okay, I'm looking at some of these questions here. We are like kind of coming down on the time, but I want to cover some things.
Yeah. Okay. I'll focus.
The best way to get an institution or organization to take a chance on you if you do not have traditional training and education. So look at the requirements for the application. If you don't meet the requirements, then I would think twice before applying. However, I will say most art applications, they're really looking for the quality of the applicant. Obviously, different programs are going to value different things, but you know, you might have like a Yale MFA, but their work and their application is not standing out like this person who's self-taught and has been at the game for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I would, you know, just show that you're actively out there. You know, one thing to keep track of, a lot of places will specify that work from like more than 2 years old can't be submitted.
Yeah.
Even if they don't, you know, to me, it's a little bit of a red flag if some of the work that's being submitted is 5+ years old.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like you're not into it. And if you know there's something you really want to apply to, really think about your portfolio and start like putting together new work for that
Yeah.
application. To put your
Because
best.
part of it too, it depends what kind of program or institution you're applying to. Because if you're applying to academia, they're just standards or rules. Like, you know, you have to have 18 hours of graduate work, you know, in that field to be able to teach at the college level. So, you know, done. But like, you know, with CU, we've worked on our application so that it's not limiting to those who have had, you know, limited to those who have had formal training. And there, of course, certainly if you're submitting to a show or there are residencies, formal training or academic training isn't necessarily a requirement anymore. So definitely check out what the requirements are. And again, if all else fails, communication is not a bad thing. You can always email, because if you have questions, please email. Shoot a very respectful email about, you know, the qualifications, especially if you've got the work to back it up.
Yeah.
So don't let that stop you.
Yep. Another question about advice for grant seekers without institutional ties, to find resources and recommendations. What I'm going to do for you right here is I'm going to post a link to a webinar we had with Daryl Ratcliffe that is exclusively devoted towards artist grants, because he will be much more thorough in answering that question than we can.
That is its own beast.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So it really is great. And grants are different. You're looking at like budgets and like proposals and there's different hoops you have to jump through, sometimes quite a bit. So definitely check that out. That's a really informative webinar that will do better than we can on short notice.
Yeah, that is a huge topic.
What makes a panelist want to pick someone over somebody else if everyone has a perfect application? Do panelists usually debate during the process of narrowing down finalists?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes and no. Like sometimes there are places where you simply like rank, you submit, it's over.
And it's done. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then sometimes the jury or the selection committee meets for hours and hours and dukes it out. So it depends.
Yeah.
And like
no application is perfect. No application is perfect. Lots of times it does have to do with who else is applying, because sometimes you're being taken as a group in a way. So it's like, oh, they will work good with them, or I could really see how this work is going to communicate with, you know, have a conversation with this work. And, you know, so that is a factor. Because I mean, artwork isn't created in a vacuum, and neither, you know, academia does not exist in a vacuum. So it does have to do with that sometimes, the complementarity of the folks who are submitting at one time. And then sometimes, you know, there are programs that take so few students, it might be a matter of, we don't have any painters. We really need to consider, you know, heavily consider the painting applications over maybe the last 6 applicants that we took were all sculptors, you know. So that doesn't totally happen, but again, don't think that every application is perfect, because it's not, which means it's okay for yours to be imperfect too. But there's certainly, it just depends on the kind of institution or organization and how it's structured, because I know that there are sometimes multiple jury rounds, so to speak, or committee rounds. So I have been a part of a large, group of folks that are helping to narrow down the applications, and that's really just my own personal opinion. That's it. And sometimes it just has to do with what I like. I've definitely applied to shows or grants or awards solely based on who the jurors are, 100%, because I think they're gonna like my work. I know it fits, and I apply to less, and I'm just more strategic about to what I apply, because I'm like, I mean, I would love to get into that show, but that juror isn't going to love my work in any. There's no way I get picked for that.
Yeah.
But maybe next year. I mean, maybe next time, different juror. So it really, there's so many factors that go into it. But I know personally, I look for a well-written, and by well-written, I mean one that really conveys what's going on in the work, artist statement. I love an artist statement that moves me. And part of that is because I have a writing background, so I appreciate that. But I really love when someone can talk about their work or can write about their work. So sometimes that might be the factor if everything else is equal, and then the effort that went into the application. If like there was like 1-word answers for applications, like yes, no, I don't know, in one sentence when you could use 1,000 words. I tend to honor those applications that definitely seem like a lot more effort went into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's just the human in me.
Right. And you have different, like, I know with selection committees I've served on, like, I'm the same way, Diane. I put a lot more emphasis on the artist statement than some of the other people's, like in committees. And I spend less time looking at the CV, for instance, but then I have, I'll like serve with people who look at the CV really carefully, and aren't as concerned with the artist statement. So, I mean, I know this is kind of like an obvious way to answer this question, but you just want to try to nail every component the best, to the best of your ability. Like, and then I'd also even say, like, I wouldn't ignore your social media presence either. Like, I'm not saying you have to have a really good social media presence, but or media presence in general. Like when there's no website at all, sometimes that makes it look like you haven't like reached the level you need to be for a certain kind of program. Or if if you go to someone's social media and it's always good to just have like if a professional account, if you like to post a whole lot of stuff that it maybe would turn off a juror.
I mean, that's just part of growing up in this age now. We need to represent ourselves well. And that means what we put out there on the internet, because if I'm thinking about someone who's going to join my program and that's how they represent themselves and that's how they're going to represent my program, that's going to affect how I see. I mean, that's just, unfortunately, that's just how it is now.
It's just kind of a reality.
But having a website, that's a really good point, because if you're at this point where you're an emerging artist and you're really taking it seriously, having a website, I mean, that's something that if I were interested in you for a certain program, I could keep referencing, and that's really important. If I no longer had access to the jury side of things for submissions that I was, the show I was jurying, but I remembered your name or your work, I could go back and look at it. I don't know. Yeah. That is a big one.
And for website, I'm gonna post another webinar we have on building an artist website. For those of you who don't have one, even if you put together something rather simple, I think it's better than not having one at all. I will say, like, for an organization like the Cedars Union, okay, yes, you want to like nail every component you can, but we're also really focused on taking people who have a lot of potential
Yeah.
and to help them make their careers better.
Yeah.
So if it's crushing you, like, and there's no way you can get a website together before applying, then that's okay. Just, it's something you can work on in the future. And I would, there was also a question about if you don't have an artist CV. Um, I would put one together.
Yeah. Put one
It'll be
together.
important to have. You'll reuse it.
You
Um,
add to it. I mean, I have it on my desktop in a Word doc. That way I can always add to it, save it new, and just change the date, add the date to it. And that's like this living document that I add to anytime I need to, make a change. But I mean, everyone starts out as a page and then
yeah.
it becomes however many pages down the road. But definitely start, um, you know, even if it's super simple, but it may just be your contact info and where you went to high school, if that's as far as you've gotten, if that's as far as along in your, academic career or professional career. It's not a resume though. So when you are looking up stuff, a resume maybe has a cool little color block and your name is in a funny font, and then there's maybe some lines going down and it says what computer programs you know how to use and when you worked at Subway. So don't put that. It needs to be like a CV is technically more of an academic, it has more of an academic structure. But if it's an artist CV, it is because you're going to include where you went to art school, what professional experience you've had, and then you've got your exhibitions.
Yeah. So build, and you can work on it over time. So like, this is something that, again, like, certain programs are going to care more about your CV than others.
Yeah.
But keep it, like, when I was fresh out of school, I would try to apply to everything. And then I was going broke applying to everything because a lot of these applications have like a,
Yeah.
$25, sometimes more,
Yeah, that adds up.
application fee. But like Diane said earlier, you know, like, I'm a printmaker, so if it's an exclusively printmaking show, I'm probably gonna have a better chance of getting in. Or if it's
Mhm.
now I just focus on things that are local that I'm not gonna have to like frame and ship my work
Ship. Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
And then there's also things that you can participate in that might not cost you really anything
Yeah.
at all, to just sort of like fill your CV. So keep track of that stuff throughout the year so you can try and get, not go a whole year without showing your work at all. I think it's a
Yeah.
good goal.
And even if it is a show like Hot and Sweaty at 500X where you pay $10, I mean, pay $10, put a piece on the wall, go to the opening, talk to people, talk about your work, start networking. Because I mean, art is very social, especially in this area. So getting out there and seeing work and talking about your work and doing open shows or some of those, juried shows if you're a college student or, whatever. But if anything doesn't cost money and there's an application, go for it. And I say that because it's also good practice. I mean, every time I rework my artist statement, it gets better. So every time I submit to something and I read back through it, I might change a few things. I'm improving on it. And filling out applications, it takes time. I hate when I get that feeling in my stomach when I'm like, what? Let's do tomorrow? Because because you get the email and you're like, I thought it was April, due in April, and it's in March, and oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? I mean, trying to pull together an application, it's just not gonna work. So give yourself plenty of time. Have that lead time so that you can really spend time on all of the elements of the application so that it's the best. But just the more you do it, the better you will become. And if they will give feedback, sometimes applications will give feedback. Take it. And I know we've had some programs at CU where we've, wanted to offer whether it's portfolio reviews or something like that. And there may be a situation where we could offer feedback on artist statements or do more of a workshop rather than a panel. But yeah, take advantage of those opportunities for sure.
And don't be afraid of rejection. It's just part of the game.
Oh my gosh, it happens all the time.
Just it's okay.
Yeah.
Do you believe photographers should apply for general artist grants or more specific photo grants?
If you're asking cynical me, I would say good luck applying for the more general ones. But that's just because I'm a cynic. But I think it depends on what the grant is and what the grant application is, because I personally have found that my work does better when I get to include an artist statement, or I get to include more about my work. My work's kind of narrative, and it kind of needs that. So if it's just like submit 3 images, I'm not going to get picked. It is not going to happen. So I really think it's more dependent on what the grant is, who you're competing against, not strictly the medium. Because sometimes if it's a open photo show that there's no limitations whatsoever, I also am convinced that I'm not going to get that, because I'm just going to get lost and there's nothing to narrow it down. But if it was like storytelling and photography, I'd be like, bam, I will pay $30 to try and get into that show or to get that grant or whatever. So
yeah,
I mean, maybe you're
local, or if
yeah,
like
if
you're
it's
searching, like if it's just for artists that live in like the 100-mile radius of Dallas, like
yeah,
you should totally apply.
and you should apply to that so that the people that are on the selection committee or jurying or whatever see your work. So even if you're not going to get in the first 4 times, maybe because your work's not there yet, or because the jurors just aren't attracted to it, which happens, people are still seeing your work. And maybe there's an online component where everyone's work's going to be made available, or you never know. But yeah, I would do local stuff no matter what.
I've had one specific example of a Cedars Union artist that applied to like a little show that wasn't like she wasn't necessarily a stellar show, but the juror was a gallerist that she respected in Dallas. And so it was like part of applying was about getting her work in front of that gallerist. So you can think about it that way too.
Because you also then, when you get into that show, you will put on your CV who the juror was. So maybe it's like random place in Ohio that no one's ever heard of. Congratulations, you got into this jury show. This is hypothetical, by the way. But the juror is a really big curator of photography at the Columbus Museum of Art. So that's huge. And I was very proud of that. But I submitted to this place I've never heard of because someone I have heard of is going to look at my work. And no, I'm not going to be represented by the Columbus Museum of Art. No, they're not going to buy my work. But it does kind of lend some credibility to that exhibition because of who the juror is. So always be mindful of that, and don't be afraid to say this is not a good idea for me to submit. Don't. I think there's a lot of wisdom in just knowing where your work could maybe find a home or where you fit, because there are some schools I wouldn't apply to. There are some, institutions or organizations that I wouldn't be a good fit for, and vice versa, right? So that's okay too, knowing those things. I mean, we all learned it, the more you know.
Yep. Okay, so we are over time. I'm gonna drop some, if you have any more questions, drop them in the Q&A. One thing we talked about was not applying last minute.
Yeah.
So if you are here because you're applying for Cedars Union, here's the join page, but also take a look at the application beforehand, because so we use slide room, and slide rooms are really common application portal for a lot of organizations and schools. And you can read the description and slide room, but you can also preview the application. And so, like we mentioned, like the version of our letter of intent, for instance, is how would joining the Cedars Union benefit you in your practice? And what would you hope to achieve with this opportunity? So that is a little different than just saying, what is your letter of intent? We got a little more specific. So you want to be able to answer to that question.
Definitely answer that question. Yeah, for
yeah.
Sure.
Instead of like a bottled answer that looks like you copy and pasted it from another application. They're also, for instance, this is a new thing that places are giving as an option at the Cedars Union. If you are, you're not a good writer, but you're a really good speaker, you have the option of submitting a video instead. To me, that sounds like, wow, like then I have to like edit a video, and that sounds really hard.
You're like, I have to write something and then I have to read it.
Yeah, but I'm also a writer, so like so it just depends. And I have seen that as a trend, as more and more people providing that as an option. So keep that in mind. And then also,
speaking to that, I said that the artist statement is something that I really look at. And because I do want to see you be able to write about your work, but I think more generally, I mean, talk about your work. So if you're thinking, oh yeah, I don't know, I'm horrible at punctuation or formatting, it won't represent me well, or I'm horrible at typing, or that's just not my strength for whatever reason, and you want to do a video where you're speaking about your work, you still need to be organized. It still needs to be coherent and to the point in a way. It shouldn't also be fluffy, but I think that's fine. That wouldn't be a negative in any way, because it would still be you talking about your work, but you would still be tasked with speaking coherently, making sure that we can hear you. There'd be other challenges too, making sure the audio is good and we can hear you, but yeah, if that suits you better, don't think that I'm not going to like it because I said I wanted to read a statement.
Yeah, same. It's just the content. And then also, you never know what sort of like technical difficulties you might run into. So and gosh, it's so stressful when you're up against like that, like 11:59.
Don't do that to yourself.
Yeah, just apply like 48 hours in advance at least, and then you have plenty of time to troubleshoot why your video isn't syncing up with this platform. If it's like a Saturday application, like, well, think about when is staff working. Like if you need to ask a question, you probably want to be able to ask it on like a Thursday and not a Saturday. So keep all that in mind. And reach out and put info@cedarsunion.org. I'm Adrienne. I manage marketing and programming. I am on Cedars Union staff. And I will vouch for the fact that we care deeply about this program, and we care deeply about everybody like getting their first, like their best foot forward and applying. Our jurors are listed on our website on the About page. Also a great thing to check out, see who our jurors are. None of them are on staff. So if you were to come for a tour, there's no like questions that you would ask or something that would hurt your chances. I totally recommend you touring the space beforehand. Okay, if only I was closer, I would so qualify and would love to apply. Well, thank you. Move to Dallas, right?
Move to Fort Worth. Fort Worth is great.
And we have, I think, what did we put? Like we have a cohort artist right now who lives in Tyler. So I think it's like 100-mile radius that we recommend.
Just so that you can participate. But
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you so much for participating, Diane, and
Absolutely.
we'll see you around.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.